We're going to have Tom Ross on Green-White Tron, who's currently 9-0, against John Pellman, 8-0-1 with Sun and Moon. His draw was to the Rally player that we had on camera yesterday.
Oh, really? Wow.
All right, so Tom is going to lead off with an Urza's Power Plant and a Chromatic Sphere. John Pellman's going to play Modern Standout, Temple of Triumph, and get a Scry. Let's see what he decides to do with it. It's going to the bottom, and I just got word that John is on a mulligan to 5.
So being on the draw on a mulligan to 5 is definitely going to bode poorly for John. We'll see what he can cobble together here. Like I said before, he's got a few cards that can overperform in the matchup. He could play a Blood Moon as soon as the following turn.
Right, Tom is just going to crack his Chromatic Sphere for green mana and cast Ancient Stirrings. He's looking at a 5 that includes a Razorverge Thicket, and it seems like he's hunting for some more land.
And with this prison-style deck, if it, normally it's looking to imprison your normal creature deck. So it's a lot of the prison elements aren't going to be quite as effective at locking Tom out of the game. They're just going to delay him.
Okay, well, Tom is just going to take a Razorverge Thicket, or an Oblivion Stone, and play Razorverge Thicket. John Pellman has a Cavern of Souls, and we'll get word on what he names. Likely in the main deck is either going to be Ape or Eldrazi for Simian Spirit Guide and Emrakul.
Yeah, kind of interesting to have that.
And he's going to play Chalice of the Void on one. It looks like he named Spirit. I believe Simian Spirit Guide is an Ape Spirit. And this is going to shut off all of those cheap cantrips that Tom has in his deck.
Yeah, so Tom is going to be relying a lot more on just naturally drawing things. He only has a few cards that can really find things that are not just 1 mana, but this is one of them.
Right, Sylvan Scrying for Tom is going to go find an Urza's Mine. And then he'll play that land for his turn and pass back to John Pellman.
And now if John can land a Blood Moon, he's going to get a lot of breathing room. He'd also like to have a Planeswalker relatively early. That's going to be his best path to victory.
And a Sacred Foundry tapped and a pass of the turn. Tom has a brush land, and now he's going to deploy that Oblivion Stone that he took off that earlier Ancient Stirrings. This is going to be a very good way for him to proactively protect himself against the lock pieces that John can put on the battlefield.
Yeah, I really wish we could see a John's deck firing on all cylinders, but this mulligan's going to be a little rough. This is definitely a pretty powerful card in the matchup, though.
Here's a Johnny Vengeant for John Pellman. He's going to keep what looks like to be the Urza's Mine tapped down. This will keep Tom off of being able to use his Oblivion Stone for a turn, but next turn he'll just be able to pop it off if he has another land.
Yeah, Johnny Vengeance is definitely one of John's better cards in the matchup, though. The ultimate can happen pretty quickly, and while it's ultimating, it can keep a land tap down to crimp Tom's mana.
Well, John Pellman just has another forest. He'll plus as a Johnny Vengeant yet again on that Urza's Mine, pass the turn back to Tom Ross. He does have 6 lands now, so a Blood Moon isn't even going to hold him down from playing Karn if he can get one more. He'll play in Sanctum of Ugin and pass the turn back to John Pellman. John's going to plus his Johnny Vengeant yet again, targeting the same Urza's Mine. Pass the turn back to Tom. Let's see if he uses this Oblivion Stone on his end step.
Yeah, and things have lined up pretty well for Tom Ross. Usually the green-white Tron deck isn't great at hitting every land drop naturally. It usually needs its cantrips to get there. But with the way things have worked out, Tom has just been able to naturally draw basically everything he wanted. He used 1 Sylvan Scrying.
Including the Urza's Tower to finish Tron on this turn.
Yeah, pretty great.
Just right off the top,
yep.
Completely unlocks everything in his hand. Looks like he has a Karn. He also has an Ugin, maybe even a Wormcoil Engine.
The world is his oyster. And now that we're at this stage in the game, it's just going to be knockout punch from Tom Ross after knockout punch, and John is going to have a very hard time keeping up.
All right. Well, Tom is going to play Karn Liberated. He'll +4 on the Karn and take a card out of John Pellman's hand, which appears to be Blessed Alliance. Play Radical Progenitus and pass the turn back to John. John has a Lightning Helix, which will take Karn down to 6 on Tom's end step.
Got to use a lot of burn spells to take down Karn Liberated.
Yeah,
He is
gonna
a
take
big
a lot of
boy.
Lightning Helixes.
Yep.
All right, Chalice of the Void on 1. And a Blood Moon.
All right, standard competitors.
All right, Relic of Progenitus will be sacrificed on Tom's end step. That's going to exile all of the graveyards, and he will draw a card in the process. Tron may be turned off for now, but he can just minus that Karn to get rid of the Blood Moon.
Yeah, if he has a another land, he could even play something like Ugin
He can
and just minus
Just play the
to get the
Ugin.
Blood Moon.
Yeah, so he'll plus his Karn, take another card.
He may also just plus his Ugin and just start killing John. If Tom doesn't have a whole lot to do with his mana, it may be worth it for him to just ignore the Blood Moon.
Yeah, so he just -3'd the Ugin, took care of the Blood Moon. John will draw for his turn, play a Rugged Prairie, and pass back. These Planeswalkers that can interact with your opponent's board and win the game all by themselves are pretty good.
Yeah, and this is pretty comical. I mean, Tom just has these an Ugin and a Karn against an opponent who just has some lands and some burn spells in his deck.
All right, here we have a Worm Coil Engine.
And this game, unfortunately, is very, very over for John Pellman. The late game certainly favors Tom Ross by a pretty large margin.
This is pretty impressive to see, this deck that's focused on assembling these non-basic lands just
naturally do it?
Just plow right through the Blood Moon deck.
Yeah, well, the thing is Tom, Blood Moon is great at making it so that the Tron lands don't produce as much mana, but you can still just draw 8 lands or 7 lands and play Karn and Ugin. So against some decks, like if we were going to say like a Jund deck, or in fact a Blood Moon would really lock them out of making a lot of plays, but against the Tron decks, Blood Moon merely just delays those plays.
And it was a pretty heads-up play by Tom to take that Oblivion Stone fairly early off of the Ancient Stirrings, knowing that at some point it's going to be relevant because this is a Blood Moon deck.
Yeah, and that is definitely something that I hadn't quite thought about when we were first looking at the deck list, but even if Tom Ross gets Blood Mooned out, he only needs 5 lands to be able to get out from underneath it because of those stones.
All right, so Tom is going to play an an Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, take out a couple red sources from John, sacrifice his Sanctum of Ugin to go get another Ulamog, and John's going to scoop it up. Let's take a look at these sideboards, see where we go from here. Tom Ross has 3 Blessed Alliance, 3 Nature's Claim, 3 Warping Whale, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Thrag Tusk, 1 Ravenous Trap, and 1 Ghost Quarter. How do you think he's going to sideboard here?
So I think the Nature's Claims are going to be great. The 2 things that Tom's worried about the most are Blood Moon, and then after that, probably Chalice of the Void. If he can keep those off the board, his deck will be firing on all cylinders. So I think Nature's Claim is going to be a great sideboard card for him.
Now on John Pellman's side, we have 2 Sudden Shock, 2 Rest in Peace, 2 Zealous Conscripts, 2 Stony Silence, a Pian Kiran Nalar, a Blessed Alliance, a Chandra Torch of Defiance, 1 Anger of the Gods, 1 Leyline of Sanctity, 1 Grafdigger's Cage, and 1 Celestial Purge. What do we think we're doing with all this?
So he's got a lot of interesting cards on his sideboard. I like the Zealous Conscripts. Being able to take your opponent's Ugin or Karn can be a pretty sweet thing to do. I also like the Pia and Kiran Nalar and the Chandra Torch of Defiance. It's just ways to get a little bit more mid-rangey. He can also bring in Stony Silence. That can be something that can be useful against a lot of Tom's important cards.
I can see that. Now, Tom's deck is focused on utilizing these awesome non-basic lands from the Urza lands, and John's deck is focused on punishing people that are trying to use those non-basic lands. And they don't have them yet, but I'm willing to bet at some point there will be Masterpiece Series Urza lands.
Oh, that would be so sweet.
That would be sweet. Until we get to that point, though, you can check out the StarCityGames.com weekly sale of the up to 25% off Masterpiece Series cards over at StarCityGames.com. It does end Monday at 10:59 a.m. And if you want to get any of the Expeditions or any of the Kaladesh Masterpiece Series Inventions, we do have some pretty sweet deals going on over at StarCityGames.com. Remember, Monday, 10:59 a.m. is when that sale ends. So after seeing how that first game played out and looking at the options that these players have in their sideboards, who do you think has the edge here in the game 2?
You know, so it's a little interesting that that first game was, I feel, pretty unrepresentative because John not only mulliganed to 5 but was on the draw, and Tom Ross managed to just naturally draw all of his lands. So I think
He did Sylvan's Grind for 1.
yeah, he Sylvan's Grind once, and I think he hit one turn 1 cantrip if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was able to draw 1 extra card off a cantrip.
Yeah.
Didn't find a Tron land on his Ancient Stirrings, and then Sylvan's Grind for 1 on turn 2.
Yeah, so Tom was kind of firing on all cylinders, and while John had some of his disruptive elements, the way things played out, those disruptive elements didn't actually do anything. So I think we could easily have a game where things work out in basically the reverse. And I think with John on the play, we have a better chance of seeing that happen. Tom gets to bring in some good sideboard cards against the things that he's most afraid of, whereas John, I mean, he has those 2 Stony Silences, which are something that I know a lot of people like in this matchup, but his sideboard cards are not particularly effective in this matchup. So I felt a little better for John in the pre-board games, but I think the post-board games, the percentage points are going to go up for Tom Ross quite a bit.
Yeah, I really like Stony Silence. In conjunction with Blood Moon, as it helps you shut off Oblivion Stone as one of the few ways they can interact with it outside of just playing 7 lands, which when you are a Blood Moon deck that isn't applying pressure, Tron getting to 7 or 8 mana isn't all that big of a deal. So I do agree with the sentiment from the first game where John definitely wants to have a Planeswalker or something before he starts locking, or very early on. While these players are checking out their opening hand, though, let's learn a little bit more about Tom Ross, since I really like these stats. He's 33 from Roanoke, Virginia, 15 top 8s, 4 wins, 4 invitational top 8s, 2 wins.
And he's just overall, one of the greatest players on the Star City circuit.
It looks like both players are going to keep their hands very quickly. John Pellman's going to start off with a Temple of Triumph and scry to the top. Pass the turn back over to Tom Ross. Tom has his basic forest in his hand, which is a big incentive to keep whatever hand you have.
Yep.
He'll lead off with a Razorverge Thicket and an Ancient Stirrings. There's a couple pieces of Tron there. Let's see what he decides to keep.
And a Karn, so Tom Ross definitely has a lot of options with what to take here.
All right, looks like he's going to take an Urza's Power Plant, which I like taking the Power Plant over the mine, since there were 2 Power Plants in there and only 1 mine. That means if he takes the mine, there's only 2 Power Plants left in the deck for him to find, whereas if he takes the Power Plant, there are 3 mines left in the deck for him to find. Small things like that are important to pick up on if you're interested in playing this type of deck.
Yeah, and I was talking before about how it's pretty hard for the green-white Tron deck to just naturally hit all of its land drops without help from his cantrips. Looking at the deck list here, I believe Tom Ross only has 19 lands in his deck.
It looks like he has 19 in the main and then 1 Ghost Quarter in the sideboard.
Yeah, so for him to just naturally hit 7 land drops in a 19 land deck is pretty unlikely. So if John is able to land an early Chalice, Tom Ross's ability to hit his land drops is going to be significantly hampered.
All right, Tom is going to Sylvan's Scrying for the last piece of Tron that he needed. So in 2 turns, he will have it online.
And this Chalice is a little late to the party. Would have liked to have seen that on turn 2 or maybe even turn 1 off a Simian Spirit Guide. I feel like John has some really powerful lines of play that we just aren't really getting to see in this match.
Well, that may be true. It looks like that Chalice is stranding multiple spheres and stars in Tom's hand right now. And there's the Blood Moon.
And here's part 2. And I really like the sequencing by John. Playing the Chalice before the Blood Moon means that Nature's Claim is not going to be able to tag that Blood Moon. So I think from the way that this played out, if I was sitting in Tom Ross's seat, I would assume that John had the turn 3 Blood Moon, but then on turn 3 drew the Chalice and chose to play it instead.
All right. So Cavern, we'll find out what it named. Spirit again. Ooh, and here we have a Batter Skull.
And this is a nice threat because once we get to the point where John is able to untap, this Batter Skull would be able to dodge a Karn or a a lot of Tom's removal. So if Tom isn't able to kill this Batterskull now, it's likely to never die.
Well, looks like Tom just picked up a copy of Oblivion Stone, though.
Well, that's what he needs. And Tom drawing exactly what he needs, basically when he needs it. This Oblivion Stone is Tom's one good way of getting out of this lock that John is starting to develop.
Tom will just play his forest and cast that Oblivion Stone. John Pellman has a mountain. He'll crash in for 4 with his Batterskull Germ token, dropping Tom down to 16, climbing up to 24 himself. He's just going to pass the turn back.
So it's nice that John Pellman is going to be able to save his Batterskull by returning it to his hand, but things are still looking a little grim. This the stone is quite the play from Tom Ross, and it's really going to help him move forward in this game.
The one reprieve is that the stone is going to take care of the board. John can bounce his Batterskull back to his hand. But Tom is only going to have like 3 mana available to him here this turn, so he can play out some of his 1-drops that have been sitting in his hand. But if John just has another Blood Moon that he can deploy here, it'll just set everything back to what it just was.
And I like Tom Ross playing out all 3 of the cantrips because it makes it so that they won't get stranded if John has another Chalice for 1. And Tom Ross has just been unstoppable. Oh wow!
Well,
so he plays all of his 1-drops so that they get underneath the Chalice for 1, and John Pellman just has the one way to punish him with this Stony Silence. Pretty unbelievable.
Would have been nice to have had that last turn to stop the
Oh
Oblivion
yeah,
Stone.
that's for sure.
But Stony Silence is going to shut off all of those 1-drops on Tom's side. And Spirit Guide in it. Use Elvish Spirit Guide to cast that Batterskull again, bringing along that Alex Bastecki Germ token. Tom does have a bunch of mana available to him now, with a Karn Liberated in his hand and a Thragtusk. We might even see both.
Yeah, it really feels like in this matchup that every step of the way, John has just been one step behind from establishing a real solid lock against Tom Ross. If this Stony Silence had come down a turn earlier, there's probably nothing that Tom would have been able to do.
Well, Karn Liberated will hit the battlefield and exile Stony Silence. This is going to unlock all of those small artifacts that Tom has. And he's going to cycle a Chromatic Sphere. Get a green mana. He might just use this map to go get a tower and then cast Thragtusk. That's what it looks like he may be doing.
Yeah, and what's nice about this play is it creates a blocker for Karn so that the Batterskull doesn't just eat Karn up.
Creates 2 blockers. Remember, you always got to carry 2 spears to combat that Thragtusk. All right, Tom will go find a tower with his floating mana, play it, cast a Thragtusk, gain 5 life, go up to 21, and pass the turn back to John Pellman.
Things are looking real grim for John. Man, Tom Ross has just been unbeatable this whole tournament. And with a green-white ramp deck.
Yeah, man.
It's like, what is... Man,
We
Tom Ross's
saw him
range
yesterday.
is unbelievable.
He came over yesterday after day 1 and was just like, this deck is way too good. I should have been playing it sooner. I wish that... I bet he's wishing that he would have held on to it and then used it at the Invitational.
Yeah.
But since he won't be in Knoxville next weekend, he does want to get all the points that he can this weekend to try and take back the lead from Jeff Hoagland and then pad his standings heading into that weekend. But Jeff did go 8-1 in day 1, so they are neck and neck.
Well, maybe no one will notice that Tom Ross is doing so good with this deck. They'll just look at the name and not look at the deck. So they'll just assume he's on Infect.
That is a possibility. I don't know how probable it is, but it is possible.
And to have Tom Ross move off of Infect onto another deck is a pretty big endorsement for that deck. But the fact that not only that, Tom is at 9-0 with it really makes this deck look good.
All right, well, Sudden Shock ×2 is going to take care of that Thragtusk. That'll give Tom a 3/3 beast token in the likeness of Todd Anderson. Alex Bistecki, as the germ, is going to attack Karn, but the beast token will jump in front of it, letting Karn live to see another day.
And those sudden shocks are out of the sideboard. So it looks like John was really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for sideboard options.
Struggling for cards to bring in.
Yeah.
Cards like Wrath, Leyline just aren't going to be good enough. Well, it looks like that's a copy of Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger that Tom Ross just picked up.
Yeah, it really seems like if John doesn't have a good start, and he's capable of some really good starts, but if he doesn't have the good start, once we get to the point in the game where Tom has a bunch of mana out, whether there's a Blood Moon out or not, it just doesn't really matter.
And so Tom has a green and a colorless mana floating after cracking that Chromatic Star. On that grave, you're not being able to see out the cards. There is an Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger trigger, Batter Skull with no mana available, and the Chalice of the Void. Karn is going to plus, taking a card out of John's hand. He doesn't have any.
And to be fair, once we get to this stage in the game,
3 more baubles.
basically green-white Tron outclasses every deck.
Yeah. Unless you're
also playing 10 and 8 mana spells.
Yeah, well, it's like unless you have some type of infinite combo or a way to go infinite,
Right.
You're going to be at a pretty big disadvantage. But the problem is, Ugin, Karn, and Ulamog, just like in addition to being giant monsters and threats that can end the game by themselves, they also interact with the opponent.
Yeah, they're great because they interact with the opponent, so you get to, like, while you're building up to something, you're also disrupting your opponent. They're also great from playing behind, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to kill this green-white Tron deck, is because when they play something like Ulamog, it's basically, kill your 2 attackers and play a blocker if you're on the defense. And if you're on the offense, you get to crimp their mana, maybe deal with a problematic planeswalker. Ugin's kind of the same way, where you play it and you can just wipe the board if you're against a bunch of attacking creatures, or if you're against someone who's trying to, generate some sort of prison against you, or is trying to control you and get a lot of value with planeswalkers, it can just start plussing and attacking them.
Well, we had a perfect flavor opportunity where Gideon Jura is taunting an Eldrazi to attack him, just like he did at Seagate. But unfortunately, Karn Liberated is going to take him out of the action. And then Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, is not going to be satiated and just going to keep attacking until the game is over. So John Pellman is going to scoop it up. Tom Ross is going to take this match 2-0 and move on